Abilene Paradox. The family sits around the table. Someone suggests driving to Abilene for dinner. It's a 2-hour trip through Texas heat. The restaurant isn't even that good, but no one objects. One person nods. Another agrees. Within minutes, everyone's in the car. 2 hours later, they're back, tired, disappointed. That's when the truth comes out. I didn't really want to go. I only agreed because I thought you wanted to. I was just going along with everyone else. Every single person made a choice they didn't want. Why? Because they assumed everyone else did. This happens all the time. Groups make decisions no one actually wants. It's called the Abilene Paradox, a breakdown in how people decide things together. It's not compromise. It's misreading consensus entirely. And it happens because people avoid conflict instead of saying what they actually think. Here's how it works. Person A stays quiet because they assume Person B wants it. Person B says nothing because they think Person C is on board. Person C doesn't push back because everyone else seems to agree. The group moves forward. Not because anyone wants to, but because no one wants to be the one who disrupts things. Silence feels safer than honesty. And silence gets mistaken for agreement. You see this in meetings where bad ideas gain momentum. No one wants to be difficult. You see it in friend groups making plans no one enjoys. You see it in relationships where both people quietly resent decisions they never actually made. The paradox feeds on politeness, on the fear of being the dissenting voice, on the assumption that everyone else knows something you don't. But here's the mechanism. Disagreement feels risky. Silence feels neutral. So people stay quiet, assuming their real opinion is the outlier. And when everyone makes that same assumption, the group ends up somewhere no one wanted to be. The Abilene Paradox doesn't need a manipulator. It doesn't need anyone pushing an agenda. It just needs people who would rather go along than speak up. And once that pattern takes hold, groups make choices that satisfy no one while convincing themselves they're acting in agreement. Paradox of choice. You're standing in front of a wall of yogurt. 50 different options. Low fat, Greek, Icelandic, organic, probiotic. You came in thinking this would take 30 seconds. 10 minutes later, you're still staring. Paralyzed. Wondering if you're about to make the wrong choice about yogurt. More choice should make life easier. That's the logic. The more options you have, the better your decision. The happier you'll feel. But the opposite happens. When choices multiply, deciding becomes harder. Satisfaction drops. Regret increases. This burden, this weight of too many options is the paradox of choice. It starts with exhaustion. Every choice requires mental effort, even small ones, weighing options, imagining outcomes, comparing alternatives. The brain treats each option as a problem to solve. And when there are dozens of problems, the mind doesn't get sharper. It gets drained. Picking yogurt becomes an evaluation process that wears you down before you've even left the aisle. But the real damage comes after you choose. With so many alternatives, you can't know if you picked the best one. Maybe the other brand tasted better. Maybe you should have tried the one your friend recommended. Maybe you missed the discount 2 shelves down. The more options you pass over, the more doubt lingers. Instead of feeling satisfied, you feel like you settled. Every option you didn't choose becomes a reminder of what you gave up. In a world with 2 yogurts, you pick one and move on. In a world with 50, every unpicked option haunts the decision. The result isn't confidence. It's regret over a choice that shouldn't have mattered in the first place. This applies beyond grocery stores. Dating apps offer endless potential matches. Harder to commit to any single person. Streaming platforms offer thousands of shows. Picking one feels like missing out on all the others. Career paths branch into countless directions. Ambition turns into paralysis. The abundance that's supposed to create freedom creates a low-grade anxiety instead. No decision will ever feel good enough. And when your expectations are sky-high, because the options were endless, even a good choice feels disappointing. You don't compare your decision to having no choice at all. You compare it to the perfect choice you imagine you could have made. That imagined perfect choice, the one you didn't pick, will always seem better. The paradox of choice doesn't make you wrong. It makes you uncertain. And that uncertainty, stretched across enough decisions, starts to feel permanent. You're not choosing poorly. You're just stuck in a system where choosing itself has become the problem. Hedonic Paradox. Ask someone what they want most in life. They'll say happiness. Ask them how to get it. They'll list things they think will make them happy. A better job, more money, the perfect relationship, a dream vacation. So they chase those things, work harder, plan more, optimize every detail. And somehow happiness stays just out of reach. The harder you chase happiness, the further it slips away. That's the Hedonic Paradox. The direct pursuit of pleasure or happiness tends to defeat itself. You can't grab happiness like an object. The moment you make it your target, you're already measuring, evaluating, checking whether you've achieved it yet. And that constant checking kills the experience you're trying to create. Think about trying to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. Or trying to be spontaneous. Planning spontaneity destroys the whole point. Happiness works the same way. When you're focused on whether you're happy right now, you're not experiencing the moment. You're judging it. And judgment creates distance. The paradox shows up everywhere. People throw elaborate parties trying to have fun, then spend the whole night worried about whether everyone's enjoying themselves. Couples plan romantic getaways to feel closer, then stress over whether the trip is living up to expectations. Someone buys something they've wanted for months, feels a brief rush, then immediately starts wondering why it doesn't feel as good as they thought it would. The mechanism is simple but brutal. Happiness doesn't exist as a standalone state you can achieve and lock in. It's a byproduct. It emerges when you're absorbed in something meaningful, connected to people, working towards something that matters. But the second you step back and ask, "Am I happy yet?" you break the absorption. You're no longer in the experience. You're outside it, measuring it. And happiness doesn't survive that kind of scrutiny. This is why people often feel happiest in retrospect. When they weren't trying. When they were just doing something they cared about, solving a problem, helping someone, laughing with friends. The happiness came as a side effect, not a goal. And the more you try to engineer that feeling directly, the more it evades you. The Hedonic Paradox doesn't mean you should never pursue anything. It means happiness isn't the thing you pursue. It's what happens when you stop checking whether you're happy and just engage with what's in front of you. The chase itself is the problem. Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine this. A time traveler goes back to meet a famous composer before they've written their masterpiece. The composer has no inspiration yet. So the traveler hums the melody. The composer writes it down. Years later, it becomes a classic. The traveler grew up loving that piece. That's why they went back to meet the composer in the first place. But here's the question. Where did the melody come from? The composer didn't create it. They copied it from the traveler. The traveler didn't create it either. They learned it from the composer's finished work. The music exists, but it has no origin. It's a loop with no beginning. That's the Bootstrap Paradox, a causal loop where an object or piece of information exists without ever being created. The name comes from the phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, an impossible task. In this case, the impossibility is information or matter creating itself through time travel. Something becomes its own cause, and logic collapses. You see this in fiction all the time. A character receives a warning from their future self, acts on it, and becomes the person who sends the warning. A scientist invents a time machine using plans they received from the future, completes the machine, and sends the plans back. The invention exists, but no one actually invented it. It simply is. The paradox breaks causality. Normally, everything has a prior cause. A leads to B, B leads to C. Chains of events stretch backward to some origin point. But in a bootstrap loop, the chain curves back on itself. The effect becomes its own cause. There's no starting point. The loop just exists, fully formed, with no explanation for how it began. This isn't just a thought experiment. It exposes a fundamental problem with backwards causation. If you could send information to the past, you could create situations where knowledge has no source. A book that writes itself. A technology that invents itself. An idea that appears from nowhere and persists because it already existed. The paradox suggests that either time travel is impossible, or causality isn't as straightforward as we assume. And it gets stranger. If a bootstrap loop exists, everything in the loop is both cause and effect. There's no privileged starting point, no original creator. The loop is self-sustaining, locked in place by its own circular logic. It exists because it exists, and that violates every intuition we have about how reality works. The Bootstrap Paradox doesn't give you a way out. It just shows you the edge where logic stops making sense. Sorites Paradox. One grain of sand isn't a heap. That's obvious. Add another grain. Still not a heap. Add another. Add another. At some point you have a heap of sand. But which grain made the difference? The 100th? The 1000th? There's no clear line. And if adding one grain never turns a non-heap into a heap, then you could add grains forever and never have a heap at all. But that's absurd. Heaps clearly exist. This is the Sorites Paradox, the problem of vague boundaries. It shows up anywhere categories have no sharp edges. When does a person become bald? Not after losing one hair. Not after two. But keep removing hairs and eventually they're bald. So where's the threshold? When does a child become an adult? When does a cluster of cells become a person? When does a country become rich? There's no precise moment, and yet we use these categories constantly. The paradox works because small changes don't seem to matter. Removing one hair doesn't make someone bald. So if one hair doesn't matter, then two hairs shouldn't matter. And if two don't matter, three don't. You can keep following that logic until you've removed every hair and still conclude the person isn't bald. But that's clearly wrong. The trap is assuming that if something is true in one step, it's true for all steps. But vague predicates don't work that way. They tolerate small changes until the accumulation forces a shift. The problem is there's no visible line where that shift happens. It's gradual, imperceptible, and our language isn't built to handle it. This plays out in real decisions all the time. Relationships don't collapse in a single moment. They erode. One small disappointment doesn't end things. Neither does the second, or the third. But at some point, it's over, and looking back, you can't pinpoint the exact moment it became unfixable. Careers drift the same way. Friendships fade. Health declines. You don't notice the boundary until you're already past it. The Sorites Paradox exposes the gap between how we talk about the world and how the world actually works. We treat categories like they have clear edges because language requires it. You're either tall or you're not, bald or not, rich or not. But reality operates on a spectrum, and the boundaries we draw are arbitrary, decided by convention, not by nature. The paradox doesn't resolve. You can't fix vague language without breaking how we communicate. And you can't eliminate gradual change without pretending the world has sharp divisions it doesn't actually have. So we live with the contradiction, drawing lines where none truly exist, knowing the heap was never one grain away from not being a heap at all. Ship of Theseus. A ship sets sail. Over time, planks rot and get replaced. Then the mast. Then the sails. Eventually, every single piece of the original ship has been swapped out. It's still called the same ship. Same name. Same function. But is it the same ship? Not one piece of the original remains. And here's where it gets worse. Someone collects all the discarded pieces. They rebuild the ship using only the original parts. Now there are two ships. One made from entirely new materials but with continuous history. One made from the original materials but freshly assembled. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? This is the ship of Theseus paradox, a question about identity and change. If something is gradually replaced piece by piece, at what point does it stop being itself? And if the original parts still exist, do they retain the identity even when disassembled? It's not just about ships. Your body replaces most of its cells over time. Are you still the same person you were 10 years ago? Not physically. Almost every cell has been replaced. But you feel like the same person. You have the same memories. Same sense of continuity. So what makes you you? The material. Or the pattern. Companies face this constantly. A startup begins with 5 founders. Over years, people leave. New people join. The original founders are gone. The mission shifts. The product changes. But the company name stays the same. Is it the same company? Employees might say no. The legal structure says yes. There's no clean answer. Relationships do this too. Two people meet. They change over time. Different jobs, different cities, different beliefs. They're not the same people they were when they met. So is it the same relationship? The connection persists, but the people inside it have been replaced, piece by piece, by new versions of themselves. The paradox reveals something uncomfortable. Identity isn't as stable as it feels. We assume things have an essence, some core that makes them what they are. But when you try to locate that essence, it slips away. Is it the material? Can't be. The material changes. Is it continuity? But continuity is just a story we tell. The gradual replacement still happened. Some say identity is about function. The ship is the ship because it sails. You are you because you perform the role of yourself. But that just shifts the question. Function changes too. And if function is all that matters, then a perfect replica would be just as real as the original. Which feels wrong. But why? The ship of Theseus doesn't give you an answer. It just shows you the question can't be answered in a way that satisfies every intuition. Identity is something we believe in because continuity creates the illusion of persistence. But look closely, and there's no solid ground beneath it. Just a pattern that keeps moving, replacing itself, and somehow staying the same. Omnipotence Paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it? If they can create it, then there exists something they cannot do. Lifting it. If they cannot create it, then there also exists something they cannot do. Creating it. Either way, omnipotence collapses. This is the Omnipotence Paradox, a logical trap that questions whether true unlimited power can exist. It's been used for centuries to challenge the concept of an all-powerful deity. But the paradox doesn't stop at theology. It applies anywhere absolute power is claimed, and it shows how language itself can create impossible situations. The problem is in the definition. Omnipotence means the ability to do anything, but anything includes self-contradictory tasks. Creating a stone too heavy to lift is only impossible if you're omnipotent. For anyone else, it's just a limitation. But for an all-powerful being, the task creates a logical contradiction. The stone must simultaneously be liftable, because omnipotence means you can lift anything, and unliftable, because you created it to be unliftable. Both cannot be true. Some argue the paradox is a trick of language. Omnipotence doesn't mean doing the logically impossible. It means doing everything that's logically possible. And self-contradictory tasks don't count. But that defense just redefines power. If there are things an omnipotent being cannot do, even logically impossible things, then the being isn't truly all-powerful. The limitation still exists, it's just been reframed. Others say the paradox misunderstands divine power. God's omnipotence isn't about brute force. It's about creative sovereignty. The ability to do anything worth doing. But that shifts the goalpost again. Now omnipotence depends on what counts as worth doing. And who decides that? The moment you add qualifiers, absolute power becomes conditional power. The paradox also appears in political philosophy. Can a dictator with absolute authority limit their own authority? If they can, then they're no longer absolute after the limitation takes effect. If they cannot, then there's something they cannot do. The same logic applies. Absolute power, when examined closely, becomes incoherent. The Omnipotence Paradox doesn't prove or disprove anything about gods or dictators. It just shows that the concept of unlimited power contains a logical contradiction. You can believe in omnipotence, but you cannot define it in a way that survives scrutiny. The moment you try to pin it down, it dissolves into paradox. Buridan's ass. A donkey stands perfectly centered between two identical piles of hay. Same distance. Same size. Same freshness. The donkey is starving, but it cannot choose. There's no reason to prefer one pile over the other. No rational basis for a decision. So the donkey stands there and starves. This is Buridan's ass, a medieval thought experiment about free will and decision-making. It's named after philosopher Jean Buridan, though he never actually used the example. The scenario is absurd. No real donkey would starve in that situation. But the paradox isn't about donkeys. It's about what happens when choice requires a reason and no reason exists. The thought experiment assumes rational decision-making. You choose based on reasons. Preference, advantage, benefit. But when two options are perfectly identical, there's no rational basis. No reason to go left instead of right. And if reason is required for choice, then choice becomes impossible. You're stuck, paralyzed by perfect balance. Real life rarely presents perfectly equal options, but it gets close. Two job offers with identical salary, benefits, and commute. Two apartments with the same rent and layout. Two brands of the same product at the same price. When options are close enough to identical, people freeze. Not because they can't physically choose, but because choosing feels arbitrary. And arbitrary choices feel wrong when you believe decisions should be rational. The paradox reveals a gap in how we think about free will. If free will means making choices based on reasons, then perfect equivalence should paralyze you. But it doesn't. People pick anyway. They flip a coin. Go with gut feeling. Choose randomly, which suggests that decision-making isn't purely rational. There's something else operating beneath the reasons. Impulse. Preference without justification. The will itself. Buridan's ass also shows up in game theory and computing. When an algorithm encounters two equally optimal paths, it needs a tiebreaker rule. Otherwise, it hangs. The rule is arbitrary. Pick the first one. Pick randomly. But without it, the system stalls. Humans do the same thing. We build in tiebreakers. When reason runs out, we rely on something else. Habit. Emotion. The arbitrary nudge that gets us unstuck. The paradox isn't resolved by saying the donkey would just pick one. That's the point. The donkey would pick. But why? If the choice is truly random, then it wasn't determined by reasons. It just happened. And if choices can happen without reasons, then rational decision-making isn't the full story. Something deeper drives action when logic gives out. Grandfather Paradox. You build a time machine. Go back to the past. Find your grandfather as a young man before he's met your grandmother. And you kill him. Simple enough. Except now your father was never born. Which means you were never born. which means you never traveled back in time, which means your grandfather is alive, which means you were born, and the loop starts again. This is the grandfather paradox, the most famous problem with backward time travel. It creates a causal contradiction. The event, your grandfather's death, prevents its own cause, your existence. And causality breaks down. Either time travel is impossible, or something stranger is happening. The paradox isn't just a science fiction problem. It exposes deep questions about how time works. If the past is fixed, immutable, then traveling back and changing it should be impossible. But if time travel is possible, then the past isn't fixed. You can alter it. And if you can alter it, then causality, the idea that effects follow from causes, stops being reliable. Anything can cause anything. Or nothing. One proposed solution is the self-consistency principle. The universe won't let you create a paradox. You can go back in time, but whatever you do was already part of history. You try to kill your grandfather and fail. The gun jams. You miss. Something intervenes. The timeline corrects itself. You were always destined to fail because you exist, and existence requires your grandfather to survive. But that just raises more questions. Who or what enforces consistency? And if you're destined to fail, do you have free will? Another solution is the multiverse. When you go back and kill your grandfather, you don't change your timeline. You create a new one. In the original timeline, your grandfather lives, you're born. You build a time machine. In the new timeline, your grandfather dies, you're never born, but you, the time traveler from the original timeline, still exist. You've just branched into an alternate reality. But now you're stranded. The timeline you came from still exists somewhere. You're just not in it anymore. A third approach denies backward causation entirely. Time travel to the past is logically impossible. Not technologically impossible. Logically impossible. Like a square circle. The concept itself is incoherent. You can travel forward, experience time dilation, age slower relative to others. But traveling backward creates contradictions that cannot be resolved. So it simply cannot happen. Time only moves one direction, and that direction is forward. The grandfather paradox doesn't tell you which solution is correct. It just shows that time travel, if possible, forces you to abandon something. Either causality, or free will, or the idea that there's one timeline. Something has to give. And whichever one you sacrifice, the universe becomes much stranger than it appears. Monty Paradox. You're on a game show. 3 doors in front of you. Behind one is a car. Behind the other 2, goats. You pick door 1. The host, who knows what's behind each door, opens door 3. A goat. Now the host offers you a choice. Stick with door 1 or switch to door 2. Most people stay. The reasoning feels obvious. 2 doors left. The car is behind one of them. 50-50 chance. Switching doesn't matter. But that reasoning is wrong. If you switch, you win 2 out of 3 times. If you stay, you win 1 out of 3 times. The math is clear. Switching doubles your odds. And yet it feels impossible. This is the Monty Paradox, named after the host of the show Let's Make a Deal. It's not really a paradox. It's a probability problem that violates intuition. When the solution was first published, thousands of people, including mathematicians, wrote in to say it was wrong. But it's not. The math works. The confusion comes from misunderstanding how the host's knowledge changes the game. Here's why switching works. When you first pick a door, you have a 1 in 3 chance of choosing the car. That means you have a 2 in 3 chance of choosing a goat. Now the host opens a door. But the host doesn't open randomly. They always open a door with a goat. And they always avoid the car. That information matters. If you pick the car initially, 1 in 3 chance, the host can open either remaining door. Switching loses. But if you picked a goat initially, 2 in 3 chance, the host is forced to open the only other door with a goat. switching wins. So 2 out of 3 times, switching wins. 1 out of 3 times it loses. Your initial pick set the odds. And they didn't change when the host opened a door. Most people treat the problem like this. 2 doors remain. 1 car, 1 goat. Equal odds. But that's wrong because it ignores the host's knowledge. The host didn't eliminate a door randomly. They used information to avoid the car. And that information is valuable. By opening a goat door, the host effectively told you whether your initial pick was right or wrong. If your initial pick was wrong 2 out of 3 times, the car must be behind the other remaining door. The paradox has been tested in experiments. People play the game thousands of times. Switchers win roughly twice as often as stayers. The math holds. And yet even after seeing the results, many people refuse to believe it. Intuition says 50-50. And intuition is stubborn. The Monty Hall problem shows how badly humans handle conditional probability. We assume odds reset when new information appears. But they don't. Prior choices carry weight. And that weight doesn't disappear just because a door opens. The game feels simple. But the logic behind it runs deeper than instinct can reach. Observer Paradox. You want to know how people really talk. So you put a microphone in the room and hit record. But the moment people know they're being recorded, they change. They speak more carefully. Choose words more deliberately. Avoid slang. The natural speech you wanted to capture disappears the moment you try to capture it. This is the observer paradox. The act of observing changes what you're trying to observe. It shows up everywhere. Language research, social science, even quantum mechanics. And it creates a fundamental problem. If observation alters the thing being observed, then pure observation is impossible. You're never seeing the thing itself, only the thing reacting to being seen. In linguistics, the paradox is structural. Researchers want to study natural, unmonitored speech. But to study it, they have to monitor it. And monitoring makes speech unnatural. People code switch when they know they're being watched. They shift toward more formal registers, suppress casual patterns. The data collected is real, but it's not the data the researcher wanted. It's speech under observation, not speech in the wild. The same pattern appears in social experiments. Put someone in a study, tell them they're being observed, and their behavior shifts. They act more cooperatively, more rationally. They follow rules more strictly, not because that's how they normally behave, but because observation creates an audience. And audiences change performance. You're no longer studying natural behavior. You're studying behavior aware of being studied. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect is even stranger. Measuring a particle's position changes its momentum. Measuring its momentum changes its position. The act of observation doesn't just influence the system. It determines the system. Before measurement, the particle exists in a superposition of states. The measurement collapses the superposition. What you observe isn't what existed before observation. It's what existence became through observation. The paradox doesn't mean observation is useless. It means observation has limits. Every measurement carries an observer footprint. Sometimes the footprint is small enough to ignore, but sometimes it's not. And when it's not, you have to account for it. Design studies that minimize observer influence. Use hidden cameras, delayed disclosure, indirect measurement, or accept that the data will always carry a trace of the observation itself. But there's no way to eliminate it entirely. Observation requires interaction, and interaction changes both sides. The observer affects the observed, and the observed affects the observer. You can reduce the distortion, but you can't remove it. The moment you look, something shifts, and what you see is never quite what was there before you looked. Paradox of tolerance. A society decides to be fully tolerant. Everyone's beliefs are accepted. Every ideology is allowed space. No viewpoint is suppressed. It's a principle of openness. But then intolerant groups arrive. Groups that reject tolerance itself. Groups that want to silence others, ban beliefs, eliminate opposition. The tolerant society faces a choice: tolerate the intolerant and risk losing tolerance altogether, or suppress the intolerant and abandon the principle of tolerance. This is the paradox of tolerance. A completely tolerant society cannot defend itself against intolerance, because defending itself requires intolerance toward the intolerant. And that breaks the principle of universal tolerance. So either tolerance destroys itself by allowing intolerance to grow, or it survives by abandoning its own foundation. The paradox was formalized by philosopher Karl Popper. He argued that unlimited tolerance leads to the disappearance of tolerance. If a society extends tolerance to those who are intolerant, and those groups gain power, they will eliminate tolerance for everyone else. The tolerant society becomes a platform for its own destruction. So tolerance to survive must be intolerant of intolerance. It's a defensive contradiction. But where do you draw the line? Intolerance isn't binary. It's a spectrum. Some groups are openly hostile to pluralism. Others are subtly exclusionary. Some advocate violence. Others just refuse to engage with opposing views. If you suppress all of them, you risk becoming the intolerant force you were trying to stop. If you tolerate all of them, you risk empowering the ones that will destroy tolerance. The paradox plays out in free speech debates. Should a liberal democracy allow speech that calls for the end of democracy? Should it platform ideologies that deny basic rights to others? Suppressing that speech feels authoritarian, but allowing it unchecked risks giving those ideologies power. And once they have power, they won't extend the same tolerance. They'll shut down the debate entirely. Popper's solution was pragmatic. Tolerance should be the default. But intolerant movements that refuse rational debate and resort to intimidation or violence should not be tolerated. The line is crossed when dialogue becomes impossible. When the other side stops arguing and starts silencing, that's when tolerance must defend itself. Not preemptively, but when the threat becomes active. But even that solution has problems. Who decides when dialogue is impossible? Who determines when a movement has crossed into active threat? Those judgments are subjective, and subjective judgments can be weaponized. One group's intolerance is another group's principled stance. The paradox doesn't resolve. It just shifts the question, not whether to be intolerant of intolerance, but when. The paradox of tolerance doesn't offer a clean answer. It just shows that tolerance, taken to its logical extreme, contains the seeds of its own destruction. You cannot tolerate everything and survive, but deciding what not to tolerate turns you into the thing you opposed. So you navigate, draw lines, defend them, and hope the line you drew was the right one. Friendship Paradox. Look at your friend list. Count how many friends each of your friends has. Now count how many you have. Odds are most of your friends have more friends than you do. This isn't because you're unpopular. It's because of math. And the math is brutal. This is the friendship paradox. On average, your friends have more friends than you have. It's been proven statistically. It shows up on every social network. Instagram, LinkedIn, everywhere. And it's not just friends. Your coworkers are likely more connected than you. Your classmates probably know more people. The pattern holds across almost every social structure. Here's why. Popular people appear in more friend lists. If someone has 100 friends, they show up in 100 different networks. If you have 10 friends, you show up in 10. So when you count your friends' connections, you're more likely to encounter the highly connected ones. They're overrepresented in your sample. The average gets pulled up, and your number looks smaller by comparison. It's not a perception bias. The math is real. Imagine a network with 5 people. Person A has one friend. Person B has one friend. Person C has one friend. Person D has one friend. Person E has 4 friends. Each of the first 4 people is friends with Person E. Person E is friends with all of them. Now, count. Person A looks at their friend, Person E, who has 4 friends. Person A has 1. Their friend has more. Same for B, C, and D. Person E's friends average 1 friend each. Person E has 4. Even the most connected person in this tiny network has friends who, on average, are less connected. The paradox holds. The effect gets worse on social media. Influencers and highly connected users dominate the network. When you scroll through your feed, you're seeing people with thousands of followers. Comparing yourself to them. Feeling less connected, but the comparison is skewed. You're not comparing yourself to a representative sample. You're comparing yourself to the people most likely to show up in your network. And those people are, by definition, more connected than average. The paradox has psychological weight. It makes people feel isolated even when they're not. You see your friends with more active social lives, more engagement. And it feels like you're falling behind. But everyone is experiencing the same distortion. Everyone's friends look more popular. Because popularity is what makes someone visible in the first place. The friendship paradox doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means the structure of networks creates an illusion. The people you see are not the people who represent the whole. They're the outliers. The ones with the most connections. And outliers always make the average look unreachable. Fermi Paradox. The universe is old. Billions of years old. The galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars. Many of those stars have planets. Some of those planets are in the habitable zone. Life should be common. And if life is common, intelligent life should have emerged somewhere. Many times. Across millions of years. So where is everyone? This is the Fermi Paradox. The universe seems built for life. The numbers suggest civilizations should exist. Advanced ones. Ones capable of interstellar travel or at least sending signals. But we've detected nothing. No transmissions. No probes. No evidence. Just silence. And that silence is either a coincidence or a warning. The paradox was framed by physicist Enrico Fermi during a casual conversation. If intelligent life is probable, and the galaxy is ancient, then even slow expansion across space would have filled the galaxy by now. Civilizations millions of years older than ours should be everywhere. Colonizing planets. Broadcasting signals. Leaving traces. But Earth has never been visited. Our instruments detect no alien activity. The sky is empty. Why? One answer is the great filter. Some step in the path from lifeless matter to spacefaring civilization is almost impossible to pass. Maybe it's the jump from simple to complex life. Maybe it's developing intelligence. Maybe it's avoiding self-destruction. If the filter is behind us, we're lucky. If it's ahead, we're doomed. Every civilization hits the wall and collapses before reaching the stars. We just haven't hit it yet. Another explanation is the zoo hypothesis. Advanced civilizations know we're here. They're watching. But they don't interfere. We're a nature preserve, a protected zone. They wait until we're ready. Or they wait until we're not. Either way, we're isolated by design. Not because we're alone. But because someone decided we should think we are. Or perhaps intelligence is common, but communication isn't. Civilizations rise and fall on different timelines. By the time we develop radio telescopes, the nearest civilization has already gone extinct. Or they exist now, but they're using technology we can't detect. Signals we're not listening for. We're shouting into the void in the wrong language, at the wrong frequency, and wondering why no one responds. The darkest possibility is that we're first. Out of trillions of planets across billions of years, Earth is the first to produce a technological species. Which means the future of intelligence in the universe depends on us. And given our track record, that's not reassuring. The Fermi Paradox doesn't have an answer. It has implications. If we're alone, the responsibility is staggering. If we're not, the silence is terrifying. Either we're the only ones who made it this far, or everyone else hit something we haven't seen yet. Braess Paradox. A city has two routes between home and work. Both take the same amount of time. Traffic splits evenly. Commute times are stable. Then the city builds a new road, a shortcut connecting the two routes. It should help. More options mean faster travel. Except it doesn't. Commute times increase. Everyone ends up worse off. The new road made traffic worse. This is Braess Paradox. Adding capacity to a network can reduce overall performance. It sounds impossible. More roads should mean less congestion. But when individuals optimize for themselves without considering the system breaks down. And everyone suffers. Here's the mechanism. Before the shortcut, drivers split evenly between two routes. No one has an incentive to switch. The routes are balanced. But once the shortcut opens, some drivers take it. It looks faster. And at first, it is. But as more drivers make the same rational choice, the shortcut becomes congested. Now it's slower. But the original routes are also slower because fewer people are using them efficiently. The system falls into a new, worse equilibrium. Everyone is trying to save time. And everyone loses time. The paradox shows up in real traffic planning. Cities have closed roads and seen congestion improve. Seoul removed an elevated highway and traffic flow got better. New York closed Times Square to cars and travel times decreased. Counterintuitive, but mathematically sound. When you remove an option, you force traffic into patterns that, while less flexible, are more efficient overall. It's not just roads. The paradox applies to any network where individuals make selfish choices. Internet routing, supply chains, even social behavior. When everyone optimizes locally without seeing the global picture, the system degrades. Adding options doesn't help. It creates new ways for the system to fail. The paradox reveals a fundamental tension between individual rationality and collective efficiency. Each driver is making the best choice given the information they have. But those choices, aggregated, produce a worse outcome for everyone. No single driver is acting irrationally. But the system is irrational. And removing choices, forcing coordination, can improve things even though it feels like a restriction. Braess Paradox doesn't mean more is always worse. It means more can be worse when the system relies on individuals making independent decisions. Optimization at the individual level doesn't guarantee optimization at the system level. Sometimes the best thing you can do is take away options and force everyone into a structure that works better, even if no one would choose it on their own. Jevons Paradox. You buy a fuel-efficient car. Better mileage means you'll use less gas. Save money. Reduce emissions. Except you don't. You drive more. Take longer trips. Stop worrying about distance. The efficiency gave you permission to consume more. And in the end, you burn just as much fuel, maybe more than you did before. This is the Jevons Paradox. Increases in efficiency lead to increases in consumption, not decreases. The resource becomes cheaper to use, so people use more of it. The savings get spent, and total consumption rises even as individual efficiency improves. The paradox is named after economist William Stanley Jevons, who observed it in coal usage. When steam engines became more efficient, coal consumption didn't drop. It exploded. More efficient engines meant coal could power more industries, more factories, more trains, more applications. The efficiency made coal more valuable, not less. And demand skyrocketed. The same pattern repeats everywhere. LED bulbs use a fraction of the energy of incandescent bulbs. So homes install more lights. Leave them on longer. Outdoor lighting expands. The total energy used for lighting hasn't dropped as much as the efficiency gains would predict. Efficiency enabled more usage. Air conditioning follows the same logic. More efficient units should reduce electricity consumption. But instead, people cool their homes more. Set lower temperatures. Run the AC longer. Add units to rooms that were never cooled before. Efficiency made comfort cheaper. So people bought more comfort. The paradox even applies to time. Email made communication faster. Did people communicate less? No. They communicate more. Constant messages. Endless threads. The efficiency didn't free up time. It created an expectation of instant response and filled the saved time with more communication. Jevons Paradox doesn't mean efficiency is bad. It means efficiency alone doesn't reduce consumption. If the goal is to use less, efficiency has to be paired with constraints. Caps on usage. Higher prices. Behavioral shifts. Without those, efficiency just makes the resource cheaper. And cheaper resources get used more. The paradox challenges the assumption that technological solutions will solve resource problems. Better technology is necessary. But it's not sufficient. If efficiency gains are consumed by increased demand, you're running in place. Getting better at using a resource doesn't mean you'll use less of it. It often means the opposite. Russell's Paradox. Consider the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Most sets don't contain themselves. The set of all cats doesn't include itself because the set isn't a cat. The set of all numbers doesn't include itself because the set isn't a number. So there's a set, call it R, that contains all sets that don't contain themselves. Now ask, does R contain itself? If R contains itself, then by definition, it shouldn't. Because R only contains sets that don't contain themselves. But if R doesn't contain itself, then it should be in R, because R contains all sets that don't contain themselves. Either way, you get a contradiction. The set cannot coherently exist. And yet the definition seems perfectly reasonable. This is Russell's paradox, a logical trap discovered by philosopher Bertrand Russell. It shattered the foundations of set theory and revealed that seemingly simple definitions can contain hidden contradictions. And it showed that mathematics, which was supposed to be built on uncheckable logic, had cracks. The paradox emerges from self-reference. When a set references itself in its own definition, strange things happen. The same structure appears in simpler forms. The Barber Paradox. A barber shaves all men in the village who do not shave themselves. Does the barber shave himself? If he does, he doesn't. If he doesn't, he does. Same loop. Same contradiction. Russell's discovery caused a crisis in mathematics. Set theory was supposed to be the foundation for all of math. If set theory contained contradictions, then everything built on it was unstable. Mathematicians scrambled to fix it. They developed new systems with restrictions. Rules that prevent self-referential sets from forming. The paradox was contained, but the damage was done. The idea that math was purely logical, free from contradiction, was gone. The paradox also shows up outside mathematics. Legal systems create self-referential loops. A law that says, this law cannot be repealed, creates a paradox. Can the legislature repeal it? If they can, the law is violated. If they can't, then there's a law beyond the legislature's power, which contradicts legislative sovereignty. Constitutions deal with this by specifying amendment processes, but the tension remains. Organizations face it too. A rule that says all rules must be approved by this committee includes itself. Who approved that rule? If the committee did, fine. But if the rule existed before the committee, it's self-authorizing. And self-authorization is logically unstable. Russell's paradox doesn't have a clean resolution. It just shows that self-reference creates instability. Systems that loop back on themselves can generate contradictions that break the system. You can patch it. Add restrictions. Build walls around the dangerous cases. But the underlying tension doesn't disappear. It just gets managed. And managing a paradox isn't the same as solving it. Liar paradox. This sentence is false. If it's true, then what it says is accurate. And what it says is that it's false. So it's false. But if it's false, then what it says is inaccurate. And what it says is that it's false. So it must be true. The sentence eats itself. True becomes false, becomes true, becomes false. There's no stable answer. This is the liar paradox, one of the oldest paradoxes in logic. It's been around since ancient Greece. And it still doesn't have a universally accepted solution. The problem is self-reference. The sentence talks about itself. And when truth values loop back, logic collapses. You can rephrase it, but the paradox remains. I am lying right now. If you're lying, you're telling the truth. If you're telling the truth, you're lying. Same loop. Or take the two-sentence version. Card 1 says, the sentence on the other card is true. Card 2 says, the sentence on the other card is false. If card 1 is true, then card 2 is true, which makes card 1 false. If card 1 is false, then card 2 is false, which makes card 1 true. The contradiction spreads across multiple statements, but it's the same structure. The paradox breaks the basic rules of logic. In classical logic, every statement is either true or false. No middle ground. No both. No neither. But the liar sentence can't be assigned a truth value without generating a contradiction. Some logicians say it's neither true nor false. It's a third category. Paradoxical. But adding a third category just pushes the problem back. Now you need rules for when something is paradoxical. And those rules can create new paradoxes. Others argue the sentence is meaningless. It's grammatically correct but logically empty. Like, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. It sounds like it means something, but it doesn't. The problem with that solution is the sentence does mean something. You understand what it's claiming. It's claiming to be false. The meaning is clear. The logic just breaks. The liar paradox also appears in computing. Programs that check themselves for errors can create loops. A virus scanner that scans itself. A system that monitors its own reliability. If the scanner says the scanner is infected, can you trust it? If the monitor says the system is unreliable, does that include the monitor? Self-referential systems are unstable, and instability in code can crash systems. Language is full of weaker versions of the paradox. I'm always wrong. If that's true, it's false. Don't trust anything I say. If you trust that, you shouldn't. This is my last lie. The sentence creates a trap. And the trap is built into the structure of self-reference. The liar paradox doesn't resolve. You can avoid it by banning self-referential statements. But that's a patch, not a solution. Language allows self-reference. Thought allows self-reference. And wherever self-reference exists, the possibility of paradox follows. Some contradictions can't be reasoned away. They just sit there, looping endlessly, breaking the system every time you try to pin them down. Barber Paradox. A small village has one barber. The barber shaves all the men in the village who do not shave themselves. And only those men. No one else. Now the question, does the barber shave himself? If he shaves himself, then he's someone who shaves himself. But the barber only shaves men who don't shave themselves. So he shouldn't shave himself. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he's a man who doesn't shave himself. And the barber shaves all men who don't shave themselves. So he should shave himself. Either way, contradiction. This is the Barber Paradox, a simpler version of Russell's paradox. It's a thought experiment designed to show how self-reference creates logical traps. The barber cannot exist under the rules given. The definition is incoherent, and yet it sounds perfectly reasonable until you try to apply it. The paradox works because the rule loops back on itself. The barber's job is defined by a category, men who don't shave themselves. But the barber is also a man, so the rule has to apply to him. And when it does, it breaks. The category can't include the person whose job is to manage the category. Self-reference destroys consistency. You see similar structures everywhere. A librarian who catalogues all books that don't mention themselves. Does the catalogue mention itself? A law that applies to all laws that don't regulate themselves. Does it regulate itself? The moment a rule or category references itself, the possibility of paradox appears. And once it appears, it can't be reasoned away. The Barber Paradox is often dismissed as a linguistic trick, a made-up scenario with no real-world equivalent. But the structure shows up in systems all the time. Oversight committees that oversee themselves. Regulatory bodies that regulate their own authority. Courts that rule on their own jurisdiction. The barber doesn't exist, but the logical trap does, and systems that ignore it end up caught in the same loop, defining their own limits while being subject to those limits, and never resolving which takes precedence. Catch-22. You're a bomber pilot in a war. The missions are deadly. You want out. There's a rule. If you're insane, you can be grounded. Mental unfitness disqualifies you from combat. So you request to be grounded on the basis of insanity. Reasonable. Except there's catch-22. Anyone who wants to get out of combat duty isn't really crazy. Wanting to avoid danger is rational. Sane. So if you ask to be grounded, you've just proven you're mentally fit to fly. Your request is denied. But if you keep flying without asking to be grounded, you might actually be insane. But you're not asking. So you stay in the air. There's no way out. The rule traps you no matter what you do. This is catch-22, a term coined by novelist Joseph Heller. It's a rule that ensures its own enforcement by making compliance impossible. You can't satisfy the condition without violating it, and you can't violate it without proving you should comply. It's a logical trap disguised as bureaucracy, and it shows up everywhere. Job postings demand experience, but you can't get experience without getting hired. You need the job to gain the qualification, but you need the qualification to get the job. The loop is sealed. Insurance won't cover a procedure unless it's medically necessary. But the only way to prove medical necessity is to try the procedure first and show it worked, which means paying out of pocket. And if you can pay, the insurance argues it wasn't necessary. Same trap, different context. Credit systems work the same way. You need credit history to get a loan, but you can't build credit history without getting a loan. Banks won't lend to people without a track record. But the track record requires loans. First-time borrowers are stuck. The system is designed to exclude the people it's supposed to serve. Catch-22 isn't just institutional. It appears in relationships. You want someone to trust you, but they won't trust you until you prove you're trustworthy. And you can't prove you're trustworthy without being trusted first. The relationship needs trust to start, but trust only comes after the relationship has started. The loop prevents the beginning. The paradox reveals how rules can be structured to ensure failure. It's not that the rule is unclear. It's that the rule is perfectly clear and impossible to satisfy. You understand exactly what's required. You just can't do it. And the system that created the rule benefits from that impossibility. It looks fair. It sounds reasonable. But it guarantees no one can meet the standard. And that's not a flaw. That's the design. Paradox of thrift. You decide to save more money, spend less. Build a cushion. It's responsible, smart. If everyone did it, society would be better off. Right? Wrong. If everyone saves more, the economy collapses. And in the collapse, everyone, including the savers, ends up worse off. This is the paradox of thrift. What's rational for an individual becomes destructive when everyone does it. Saving is good, but universal saving is catastrophic. And the mechanism is simple. Your spending is someone else's income. When you cut spending, someone else earns less. When they earn less, they cut spending, and the cycle spreads. Restaurants see fewer customers. They lay off workers. Those workers have less income. They stop going to restaurants. More workers get laid off. Factories produce less because no one's buying. Production cuts mean more layoffs. Incomes drop further. And the people who started saving to protect themselves find their jobs disappearing. The money they saved loses value because the economy is shrinking. Savings don't help if there's nothing to buy and no income to replace what you've spent. The paradox played out during the Great Depression. People hoarded cash, stopped spending, thought they were being prudent. And the economy spiraled. Demand collapsed. Businesses failed. Unemployment skyrocketed. The collective caution made everyone poorer. Spending would have saved the economy. But no individual wanted to be the one spending while everyone else saved. So everyone saved. And everyone suffered. It's not just historical. The same pattern appears in every recession. People get scared, cut back, try to protect themselves, and the cutbacks deepen the crisis. Governments try to counter it by spending more, stimulus, public projects, anything to keep money moving. Because if money stops moving, the economy stops working. And if the economy stops, savings become worthless. The paradox doesn't mean saving is always bad. It means context matters. In a healthy economy, saving is fine. Some people save, others spend, and the balance works. But when fear spreads and everyone saves at once, the individual logic breaks the system. What's good for one becomes poison for all. And the poison circles back to harm the individual who thought they were protecting themselves. Paradox of plenty. A country discovers oil, massive reserves, enough to fund decades of development. It should be a blessing. Wealth, infrastructure, education. But the opposite happens. The economy stagnates, corruption spreads, growth slows. Other industries collapse, and the country ends up poorer than neighbors with no resources at all. This is the paradox of plenty, also called the resource curse. Natural resource wealth often leads to worse economic outcomes, not better. Countries rich in oil, diamonds, minerals tend to grow slower, develop weaker institutions, and experience more conflict than resource-poor nations. The wealth that should have built prosperity destroys it instead. The mechanism runs through several channels. First, resources create easy money. The government doesn't need to tax citizens or build competitive industries. It just extracts and sells. That removes accountability. Citizens can't demand good governance if the government isn't dependent on them. So corruption flourishes. Leaders siphon wealth. Institutions weaken. And the resource money funds the decay. Second, resource wealth kills other industries. When oil money floods in, the currency strengthens. Exports become expensive. Manufacturing can't compete. Agriculture suffers. The entire economy narrows to one sector. And when resource prices drop, there's nothing left to fall back on. The country is trapped. Dependent on a single commodity. Vulnerable to global markets it can't control. Third, resources attract conflict. Rebel groups fight for control. Governments spend on military instead of development. Civil wars erupt over resource regions. The wealth doesn't build the country. It tears it apart. Every faction wants a share, and the fight over the resource prevents anyone from using it productively. Venezuela had the largest oil reserves in the world, and collapsed into poverty. Nigeria has been oil-rich for decades, still struggles with development. The Democratic Republic of Congo is full of valuable minerals, and remains one of the poorest countries on Earth. Meanwhile, Singapore, Switzerland, Japan built wealth with almost no natural resources. They had to develop industries, education, institutions. The lack of easy money forced them to build sustainable economies. The paradox isn't universal. Norway managed its oil wealth well, saved the revenue, invested carefully, built a sovereign wealth fund. But Norway is the exception. Most resource-rich countries follow the curse. The wealth is there, but but the structure it creates prevents the wealth from being used well. And in the end, the plenty becomes scarcity, not because the resources ran out, but because the resources prevented the country from building anything beyond them. Paradox of value. Water keeps you alive. You need it every day. Without it, you die in days. Diamonds are useless. Decorative. You can live your entire life without touching one. So why does water cost almost nothing while diamonds cost a fortune? This is the paradox of value, also called the diamond-water paradox. The things most essential for survival are cheap. The things least essential are expensive. It seems backwards. Shouldn't value track importance? But price doesn't measure importance. It measures something else. Scarcity and marginal utility. Water is abundant. In most places, you can get it easily. The first glass of water is invaluable. It saves your life. But the second glass, less critical. The 10th, you might not even drink it. Each additional unit of water is worth less than the one before. That's marginal utility. And because water is plentiful, the marginal utility stays low. The price reflects the value of the last unit, not the first. Not the total, just the marginal one. Diamonds are rare, hard to find, hard to extract. You don't need diamonds. But because they're scarce, each one holds value. The marginal utility of a diamond doesn't drop much because you're never going to have enough diamonds to make them common. Scarcity keeps the price high, not because diamonds are more important than water, but because they're harder to get. The paradox shows the difference between use value and exchange value. Water has enormous use value. It's essential, but it has low exchange value because it's abundant. Diamonds have little use value, but high exchange value because they're rare. Price tracks scarcity, not necessity, and that creates situations where the most vital things are the cheapest. This logic applies beyond commodities. Air is free, absolutely essential, but abundant. So it has no price until it's not abundant. Astronauts pay for air in space. People in polluted cities buy air purifiers. Scarcity creates value. Abundance destroys it. Even for things you can't live without. The paradox also explains why crises shift prices. During a drought, water prices spike. Suddenly, the marginal glass matters. Scarcity makes it expensive. During a pandemic, masks become valuable. Not because masks suddenly became more useful, but because they became scarce. The use value was always there. The exchange value only appeared when supply couldn't meet demand. The paradox of value doesn't resolve. It just shows that markets don't price things based on importance. They price based on availability at the margin. And that means the most critical resources, the ones that sustain life, often cost the least. Until the moment they become scarce. And then the price reflects what they were worth all along. Paradox of control. The tighter you hold, the more it slips away. You micromanage a project to ensure quality, and quality drops. You monitor your partner constantly to feel secure, and the relationship fractures. You hover over your child to keep them safe, and they rebel. The more control you try to exert, the less control you actually have. This is the paradox of control. Excessive control undermines itself. The very act of trying to manage every detail creates the chaos you were trying to prevent. And the harder you try to fix it, the worse it gets. In organizations, micromanagement kills performance. When a manager controls every decision, employees stop thinking. They wait for instructions. Stop taking initiative. Creativity dies. Motivation disappears. The manager thinks they're ensuring quality by overseeing everything. But they're actually degrading quality by removing the autonomy that makes people care about their work. The team becomes dependent, passive, and when the manager isn't there, nothing happens. The control created fragility, not strength. In relationships, the same pattern plays out. One partner demands constant updates, checks messages, questions motives. The intention is to feel secure, but the surveillance creates distance. The monitored partner feels untrusted, starts hiding things, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because the scrutiny is suffocating. The relationship that was supposed to be protected by control is destroyed by it. Trust dies under the weight of verification. Parents do this with children. Overscheduling, monitoring every interaction, removing risk. The goal is safety, but the result is dependency. Kids don't learn to handle uncertainty. They don't develop judgment. When they finally get freedom, they don't know what to do with it. The control that was supposed to protect them left them unprepared for life without it. And when they inevitably make mistakes, the mistakes are bigger because they never learn to make small ones. The paradox emerges from a fundamental misunderstanding of what control is. Real control isn't about dictating every action. It's about setting boundaries and letting systems self-regulate within them. When you try to control everything, you eliminate the feedback loops that keep systems stable. People stop self-correcting because they're waiting for you to correct them. And when you can't be everywhere, the system collapses. The paradox doesn't mean control is always bad. It means excessive control backfires. There's a point where more oversight produces less order, where more rules create more chaos. And the people most obsessed with control are often the ones least able to see when they've crossed that line. They interpret resistance as proof they need more control. And the cycle tightens until something breaks. The paradox of control resolves only by letting go. Not completely, but enough to let people make decisions. Enough to let systems adapt. The goal isn't to eliminate control. It's to recognize that control has limits. And past those limits, it becomes the thing you were trying to avoid. Loss of influence. Loss of trust. Loss of the very stability you thought you were protecting. Paradox of hedonism. Pleasure is the goal. So you chase it. Plan the perfect vacation. Engineer the ideal night out. Optimize every experience for maximum enjoyment. And somehow, the fun never arrives. The more you focus on having a good time, the more forced it feels. The harder you try to enjoy yourself, the more the enjoyment slips away. The pursuit of pleasure defeats itself. When happiness becomes the target, you're no longer experiencing the moment. You're evaluating it, judging whether it meets expectations. And that constant measurement kills the thing you're trying to create. Pleasure doesn't survive scrutiny. It emerges when you're absorbed in something else, and disappears the moment you check whether it's working. Think about laughter. You can't force it. The harder you try to laugh, the more awkward it becomes. Genuine laughter happens when something strikes you as funny, not when you're trying to be amused. Same with relaxation. Trying to relax creates tension. The effort to unwind tightens you up. You can't command your mind to enjoy itself. Enjoyment is what happens when the mind stops commanding. People throw parties trying to have fun, and spend the whole night stressed about whether everyone's enjoying themselves. The focus on fun prevents fun. Couples plan romantic getaways to feel closer, then worry the whole trip about whether the romance is happening. The anxiety about connection blocks connection. Someone buys something they've wanted for months, feels a brief rush, then immediately wonders why it doesn't feel as good as expected. The anticipation built it up. The achievement let it down. Because the focus was on the feeling, not the thing itself. Happiness works as a byproduct. It shows up when you're doing something that matters. Solving a problem. Helping someone. Working toward a goal. The feeling comes alongside the action, not from targeting the feeling directly. And the people who report the highest satisfaction are often the ones who weren't chasing satisfaction. They were chasing meaning, purpose, challenge, happiness tagged along. The paradox doesn't mean you should never pursue anything enjoyable. It means enjoyment isn't something you can grab. It's something that appears when you stop checking for it. The moment you step back and ask, "Am I happy yet?" you've broken the state. You're outside the experience, observing instead of living it. And observation kills immersion, which kills pleasure. Paradox of progress. Technology makes life easier. Washing machines save hours of labor. Email speeds up communication. Cars cover distances that used to take days. Every advancement frees up time. And yet no one has more time. People are busier now than before the machines arrived. Progress didn't create leisure. It created new demands. And the demands filled the space the efficiency was supposed to open up. Washing machines meant you could wash clothes more often. Higher standards. More laundry. Email made communication instant, which meant constant messages. Endless replies. The expectation of immediate response. Cars made distant places accessible, so people moved farther from work. Commutes expanded. The time saved by speed got consumed by distance. Every efficiency gain gets absorbed by rising expectations, and the result is the same amount of work, just faster. This pattern repeats everywhere. Faster computers don't reduce workload. They enable more complex tasks, more data, more analysis. The work expands to fill the capacity. Delivery services make shopping easier, so people shop more. Convenience doesn't reduce consumption. It increases it. Streaming services offer unlimited entertainment, and choosing what to watch becomes a new form of work. The abundance that was supposed to make decisions easier makes them harder. The paradox shows up in historical data. Medieval peasants worked fewer hours per year than modern office workers. They had long breaks between planting and harvest, festivals, holy days. Industrial progress gave us machines and took the breaks, because machines don't rest. And if machines don't rest, workers can't either. Progress didn't free people. It accelerated them. And acceleration, once it starts, doesn't stop. It just keeps increasing the baseline. Even in personal productivity, the pattern holds. Time-saving apps promise to organize your life, and instead they create new tasks. Checking notifications, managing lists, syncing calendars. The tools designed to reduce cognitive load add cognitive load. Because every tool requires maintenance, and maintenance takes time. The app that was supposed to help you ends up becoming one more thing to manage. Progress delivers what it promises: efficiency, speed, capacity. But it doesn't deliver rest, because efficiency creates new possibilities. And new possibilities create new obligations. The space that opens up doesn't stay empty. It gets filled immediately. Not with leisure, with more work. Just faster. And the faster it goes, the faster it's expected to go. Until progress isn't about making life easier anymore. It's about keeping pace with the speed that progress itself created. Paradox of freedom. Unlimited freedom sounds ideal. No rules, no restrictions, complete autonomy. But when every option is available, choice becomes paralyzing. Structure disappears. Direction vanishes. And instead of liberation, you get drift. Too much freedom doesn't empower. It overwhelms. And the overwhelm can be worse than constraint. Constraints provide shape. They narrow possibilities. And narrowing possibilities makes decisions manageable. When you only have a few options, you pick one and move forward. When you have infinite options, every choice feels like a mistake. Because no matter what you choose, you're closing off countless alternatives. The freedom to do anything becomes the inability to do something. Artists know this well. Give a painter an empty canvas and total freedom. No theme, no deadline, no expectations, and many freeze. The blank canvas offers too many possibilities, but add a constraint. Paint only in blue, finish by tomorrow. Focus on a single subject, and creativity flows. The limitation forces decisions, and decisions create momentum. Freedom without boundaries often produces nothing. Freedom within boundaries produces work. Students experience the same trap. Self-directed learning sounds appealing. Study whatever you want. No curriculum. No schedule. But most people don't thrive in that environment. They drift, start projects, abandon them. The lack of structure removes accountability, and without accountability, motivation fades. The freedom to learn anything becomes the freedom to learn nothing. Because learning requires friction, deadlines, milestones, the structure that freedom supposedly removes. Even in relationships, total freedom creates problems. Open relationships with no rules. Complete autonomy. Sounds liberating, but often leads to confusion, jealousy, uncertainty, because humans need boundaries to feel secure, not rigid ones, but some definition of what's expected, what's acceptable, what's not. The relationship with no limits becomes a relationship with no shape. And without shape, connection erodes. People drift apart while technically still together. The paradox isn't that freedom is bad. It's that freedom needs structure to function. Complete autonomy sounds appealing in theory, but in practice it's disorienting. Choice requires filters. Direction requires constraints. And the absence of limits can be just as restrictive as the presence of too many. Because when everything is possible, nothing feels necessary. And when nothing feels necessary, action stalls. The freedom to do anything becomes the paralysis of not knowing where to start. Paradox of expertise. The more you know about a subject, the harder it becomes to explain it to others. Experts struggle to teach beginners. Not because they lack knowledge, but because they have too much. The depth of understanding that makes someone an expert also makes them blind to what it's like not to know. And that blindness creates a gap. The expert can't remember what confused them when they were learning. So they skip steps, use jargon, assume background that isn't there. And the explanation fails. Expertise rewires how you think. Concepts that once seemed difficult become automatic. You stop noticing the intermediate steps. Your mind jumps directly to conclusions. And when you try to explain your reasoning, you can't. Because the reasoning happens beneath conscious awareness now. It's intuition. Pattern recognition. You see the answer without tracing the path. And if you can't trace the path, you can't show someone else how to walk it. This is why great researchers often make terrible teachers. They understand the subject deeply, but they can't break it down. They present advanced ideas as if they're obvious. Use terminology without defining it. Build on assumptions the student doesn't have. The expert thinks they're being clear, but they're clear at the wrong level. They're explaining to someone at their level of understanding, not at the student's level. And the student gets lost. Meanwhile, someone who just learned the material recently often teaches it better. They remember the confusion. They know which parts are hard, which explanations helped, which didn't. Their understanding is still fresh enough that they can see the gaps. They haven't automated the knowledge yet, so they can walk through it step by step. The person who barely understands something can explain it more clearly than the person who mastered it years ago. The paradox shows up outside teaching too. Experts make worse predictions than generalists in many fields. Because experts overweight the factors they know deeply and underweight the ones outside their specialty. They see complexity where it doesn't exist, miss simplicity where it does. Their depth creates blind spots. A generalist, knowing less, makes broader, simpler models. And those models often predict better because they're not cluttered with expert-level nuance that doesn't actually matter. The same pattern appears in communication. The more specialized your knowledge, the harder it is to talk to non-specialists. You forget what's common knowledge and what's not. Use acronyms without thinking. Reference concepts that seem basic to you but are foreign to others. The expertise that makes you valuable also isolates you, because you're speaking a language most people don't understand. And translating requires stepping outside your expertise, which is exactly what expertise makes difficult. Paradox of effort. Try too hard and you fail. Athletes choke under pressure when they overthink movements that should be automatic. Performers freeze on stage when they focus too much on technique. Conversations become awkward when you try too hard to be interesting. The effort to succeed creates the conditions for failure. And the harder you try, the worse it gets. Skill depends on automaticity. When you're learning, conscious effort is necessary. You think through every step. But once you've mastered something, conscious control gets in the way. Your body knows what to do. Your mind just needs to get out of the way. Overthinking disrupts the flow. The golfer who thinks about their swing mid-swing. The pianist who becomes aware of their fingers mid-performance. The effort to control what should be automatic breaks the automaticity. And performance collapses. This doesn't just apply to physical skills. Social interaction works the same way. When you try too hard to make a good impression, you come across as fake, forced. People sense the effort. An effort in social settings signals insecurity. The person who's relaxed, not trying, seems more confident, more authentic. The moment you start monitoring how you're coming across, you stop coming across well. Because monitoring makes you stiff, self-conscious, and self-consciousness kills natural interaction. Creative work follows the same rule. Forcing ideas doesn't produce good ideas. It produces strained ones. Writers who try too hard to be clever end up sounding pretentious. Designers who overwork a concept make it worse, not better. The best ideas often come when you're not trying. Walking. Showering. Doing something else. The effort to create blocks creation. Because creation requires a certain looseness, a willingness to let things emerge. An effort tightens everything up. Even problem-solving works this way. Staring at a difficult problem, trying to force a solution, often gets you nowhere. But step away. Stop trying, and the solution appears. The effort was blocking the answer. Because effort narrows focus. And narrow focus can miss connections that require broader awareness. Relaxing the effort opens up peripheral vision. And peripheral vision is where unexpected solutions live. The paradox doesn't mean effort is useless. It means there's a point where more effort makes things worse. Where trying harder produces worse results than trying less. The skill is knowing when to push and when to release. When to engage conscious control and when to let automatic processes take over. And the people who master that balance aren't the ones who try hardest. They're the ones who know when to stop trying. Paradox of productivity. You optimize everything. Plan your day down to the minute. Use productivity apps, time block, batch tasks. Eliminate distractions. And somehow, you get less done. The systems designed to make you efficient become the things slowing you down. Because maintaining the system takes time. And the time spent maintaining the system is time not spent working. Productivity tools multiply. You have an app for tasks, another for notes, one for scheduling, one for tracking habits, and they all need to sync, be updated, checked, managed. The tools that were supposed to reduce cognitive load created new cognitive load. Now you're not just doing the work. You're managing the system that's supposed to help you do the work, and the management becomes work itself. The same thing happens with routines. You read that successful people have morning routines. So you build one. Meditation, exercise, journaling, reading, healthy breakfast. By the time the routine is finished, half the day is gone. The routine designed to make you productive consumed the productive hours. And if you skip part of it, you feel guilty. The routine became an obligation, not a tool. And obligations drain energy instead of creating it. Optimization has diminishing returns. The first improvements help. Cutting out obvious time wasters, organizing your workspace, setting priorities. But past a certain point, the effort to optimize exceeds the benefit. You spend an hour researching the perfect task management system. That's an hour you could have spent doing tasks. You reorganize your files to save time later, but the reorganization takes longer than the time you'll save. The optimization becomes procrastination disguised as productivity. Meetings about productivity are the clearest example. Teams spend hours in meetings trying to figure out how to be more productive. The meeting itself is the productivity drain. But because it's framed as improvement, it feels justified. Same with training sessions, workshops on time management. The time spent learning to save time often exceeds the time saved. And the irony is invisible because the activity is labeled productive. The paradox reveals a fundamental tension. Productivity requires doing, but productivity culture focuses on optimizing how you do. And optimization, taken too far, replaces doing with planning, with reviewing, with tweaking. The system becomes more important than the output. And output is what productivity is supposed to measure, not the elegance of your workflow, not the sophistication of your tools, just what you actually accomplished. And sometimes the best way to accomplish something is to stop optimizing and just start. Paradox of privacy. You want privacy, so you secure your data, strong passwords, encryption, VPNs. Yeah, you're careful about what you share. But the more you protect yourself, the more suspicious you look. Privacy-conscious behavior gets flagged as potential criminal activity. Using encryption, avoiding surveillance, opting out of tracking. These aren't just seen as normal precautions. They're seen as signs you have something to hide. Governments and corporations assume that innocent people have nothing to fear. If you're protecting your privacy, you must be hiding something wrong. The logic flips. Privacy becomes evidence of guilt, and the attempt to maintain privacy draws scrutiny, not less. You become a target precisely because you tried to avoid becoming one. Airports screen passengers who pay cash. Use encrypted phones. Avoid social media. The very steps you take to stay private mark you for extra screening. Financial institutions flag accounts that avoid the usual data trails. Privacy protections trigger anti-money laundering alerts. The more you stay off the grid, the more attention you attract from systems designed to monitor the grid. Even in social contexts, privacy creates suspicion. Someone who doesn't share on social media, who keeps their life offline. People wonder what they're hiding, why they're so secretive. The cultural norm has shifted. Transparency is expected. Privacy is treated as abnormal, and abnormal behavior gets questioned. You're not protecting yourself. You're making yourself stand out. And standing out invites investigation. The paradox deepens with technology. Privacy tools exist, but using them sends a signal. Encrypted messaging apps, anonymous browsing. These tools protect your data, but they also mark you as someone who cares about protection. And in a surveillance-heavy world, caring about protection is itself a data point. One that gets collected, analyzed, used to build a profile of you as someone with privacy concerns, which means someone worth watching more closely. The choice becomes impossible. Protect your privacy and attract attention, or give up privacy to blend in. Neither option actually gives you privacy. One makes you visible by trying to hide. The other makes you visible by not hiding. The system is designed so that privacy, as a functional reality, no longer exists. Only the appearance of it, and even that appearance is monitored. Paradox of riches. Wealth is supposed to solve problems, buy security, freedom, comfort, and it does. To a point. But past that point, Wealth creates new problems that didn't exist before. Managing the money, protecting it, deciding who to trust, worrying about being used. The more you have, the more complex life becomes, and complexity brings stress. The wealth that was supposed to eliminate stress generates it instead. Rich people worry about whether friendships are genuine. Every relationship carries a question. Do they like me or do they like my money? That doubt doesn't exist when you have nothing. But once you're wealthy, it's always there. Relationships become transactional, or feel transactional, even when they're not. The suspicion poisons closeness, because you can't know for sure, and not knowing creates distance. The wealth that should have brought connection creates isolation. Then there's the problem of choice. Wealth removes constraints. You can live anywhere, do anything. But unlimited choice is paralyzing. Where do you live when you can afford anywhere? What do you do when no job is necessary? The structure that poverty imposes, the limits that guide decisions, disappears. And without limits, direction vanishes. People with extreme wealth often report feeling aimless, untethered. The freedom became emptiness. Wealth also attracts predators, scammers, fraudsters, people who see you as a target. The richer you are, the more you have to protect yourself. Legal structures, security, advisors. The cost of protection grows with wealth, and so does the fear. Every interaction becomes a potential threat. Every opportunity a possible scam. You can't relax. Can't trust easily. The wealth that was supposed to bring peace of mind brings vigilance instead. Even spending becomes complicated. When you can afford anything, buying loses meaning. The anticipation that makes purchases exciting disappears. You want something, you get it. No saving, no planning, no delayed gratification. And without that, acquisition feels hollow. The thing you bought doesn't bring satisfaction. Because there was no effort, no sacrifice. Wealth removes the friction that makes obtaining things rewarding. And without friction, rewards feel empty. The paradox isn't that wealth makes you miserable. It's that wealth solves one set of problems by creating another. The new problems are different from the old ones. But they're still problems. And in some ways they're harder, because money can't fix them. The very thing that's supposed to be the solution, the wealth itself, is the source of the issue. And there's no amount of money that buys your way out of that. Paradox of voting. Your vote doesn't matter. The chance that your single vote decides an election is nearly zero. Statistically insignificant. So why vote? From a purely rational perspective, voting makes no sense. It costs time, energy. And the benefit, your individual impact, is effectively nothing. Yet millions of people vote. And if they didn't, democracy would collapse. The system depends on everyone acting irrationally, doing something that doesn't benefit them individually, but benefits everyone collectively. Rational choice theory says people act in their self-interest. Voting contradicts that. Your vote won't change the outcome. So staying home is the rational move. Let others vote. Enjoy the result without the effort. But if everyone thinks that way, no one votes. And the system fails. Democracy requires people to behave irrationally. To vote even though voting doesn't make individual sense. The paradox deepens when you consider information costs. Being an informed voter takes work. Reading, researching, understanding policy. Most people don't have time for that. And even if they did, why bother? Your informed vote has the same weight as your uninformed vote. Which is to say, almost no weight at all. So the rational move is to stay uninformed. Or vote based on tribal affiliation, party loyalty, whatever requires the least effort. Because effort doesn't change the outcome. But democracy depends on informed voters. If everyone stays uninformed, voting becomes meaningless. Just noise. Random preferences aggregated into random outcomes. The system needs people to invest time learning about issues, even though that investment produces no individual return. Collective rationality requires individual irrationality, and individual rationality destroys collective outcomes. Then there's the problem of strategic voting. In many systems, voting for your actual preference is irrational. You have to vote for the lesser evil, the viable candidate, not the one you actually want, because voting for someone who can't win wastes your vote. But if everyone votes strategically, no one votes for what they actually want. The system delivers results no one prefers. Everyone compromises, and the compromise becomes the only option. The act of voting strategically ensures that true preferences never get represented. The paradox of voting doesn't have a solution. Democracy works because people ignore rational self-interest. They vote even though it doesn't matter. They research issues even though research doesn't pay off. They act as if their participation makes a difference. And collectively it does. But individually it doesn't. The system runs on a collective illusion that your vote matters. And the moment people stop believing the illusion, the moment they act rationally, the system collapses. Paradox of prevention. You prevent a disaster. The system doesn't collapse. The crisis doesn't happen. And people assume it was never going to happen in the first place. The prevention erased the threat. So the effort looks unnecessary. Wasteful. Why did we spend so much money on something that didn't occur? The success of prevention becomes evidence against the need for prevention. And the next time, funding gets cut. Preparation gets abandoned. Until the disaster finally happens. And then people ask why no one saw it coming. Public health runs into this constantly. Vaccines prevent disease. But when disease rates drop, people question whether vaccines are necessary. The success of vaccination makes the threat invisible. Parents see healthy children and wonder why they're injecting them with something for a disease they've never seen. The disease disappeared because of the vaccine, but the disappearance makes the vaccine seem pointless. So vaccination rates drop, and the disease returns. The same pattern plays out in infrastructure. Flood defenses prevent flooding. The area stays dry. And after years without floods, people question the expense. Why maintain these walls when there's no flooding? The walls are why there's no flooding, but the absence of disaster makes the defense look unnecessary. So maintenance gets deferred, budgets shrink, and eventually the next storm breaks through. The system that protected everyone is blamed for not being there when it fails. But it failed because people stopped maintaining it. Financial regulation works the same way. After a crisis, regulations tighten. Markets stabilize. And once things are stable, the regulations feel burdensome. Why do we need all these rules when everything's fine? The rules are why everything's fine, but stability makes the rules look excessive. So they get rolled back. And the next crisis hits. The cycle repeats. Regulation after crisis. Deregulation after stability. Each generation forgets that stability was built, not natural. Cybersecurity faces this paradox every day. Companies invest in security. No breaches occur, and executives start questioning the security budget. We're spending all this money and nothing's happening. Nothing's happening because of the spending. But absence of incidents doesn't prove the spending works. It just creates the appearance that threats don't exist. So budgets get cut, and breaches eventually happen. Then everyone blames security for failing, but security failed because it was defunded after succeeding. The paradox of prevention creates a perverse incentive. The better you are at preventing problems, the less people believe problems were ever real. Your success undermines support for the thing that created success. And you can't prove a counterfactual. You can't show what would have happened if you hadn't acted. All you can show is that nothing happened. And nothing happening looks like nothing was needed. Until something does happen. and by then, it's too late to prevent it. Paradox of novelty. You crave new experiences, novel sensations, fresh perspectives. Routine feels deadening, so you seek change. Travel. Try new things, chase variety. But the more novelty you consume, the faster novelty becomes routine. Your brain adapts. What was exciting yesterday feels normal today, and you need something even newer to get the same feeling. The pursuit of novelty accelerates, and the acceleration kills the very thing you were chasing. The capacity to be surprised. Novelty works through contrast. New experiences stand out because they're different from what came before. But when everything is new, nothing is. When you're constantly consuming novel content, switching contexts, trying new things, your baseline shifts. The brain recalibrates. What used to feel fresh now feels standard. And you need greater intensity, stranger experiences, more extreme novelty, just to feel what you used to feel from simple change. Social media turbocharged this cycle. Every scroll offers something new. A new post, new image, new idea. The feed is infinite novelty. And it's addictive precisely because it delivers constant stimulation. But the stimulation has a cost. Your tolerance builds. What grabbed your attention last week doesn't work this week. The algorithm has to escalate. Weirder content, more outrage, stronger emotional hooks, and your brain keeps adapting, demanding more to feel the same level of engagement. Travel faces the same trap. You visit one country. Amazing. Then another. Still exciting. But after the 10th, 15th, 20th country, the thrill fades. Not because the places aren't interesting, but because the act of traveling itself has become routine. You've done it so many times that even exotic locations feel familiar. The novelty of novelty is gone. You're a jaded traveler, chasing experiences that can no longer deliver the feeling they used to. Even relationships follow this pattern. The excitement of meeting someone new, learning about them. Early attraction. But that wears off. The person becomes familiar. And if you're addicted to novelty, familiar feels boring. So you move on, find someone new, get the rush again, briefly. Until that fades too. The cycle repeats. And each time the novelty wears off faster. Because you've trained yourself to expect constant newness. And constant newness makes everything feel old. The paradox traps you in escalation. You seek novelty to escape boredom, but seeking novelty creates the need for more novelty. The more you chase it, the less it satisfies. And the less it satisfies, the more you chase. Until you're running constantly just to feel normal. Not happy. Not excited. Just not bored. The pursuit of novelty doesn't free you from routine. It creates a new routine. One where nothing is ever enough. Paradox of self-reference. This sentence is talking about itself. And the moment it does, things get unstable. Self-reference creates loops. Loops create contradictions. And contradictions break logic. Most of the time, language works fine. Sentences describe things outside themselves. But when a sentence turns inward, points back at itself, the structure collapses. And the collapse reveals something fundamental. Language, logic, systems. They all rely on pointing outward. The moment they point inward, they malfunction. Rules about rules. Laws that govern laws. Systems that regulate themselves. These are all self-referential, and they all create problems. A constitution that says it can't be changed. Can it be changed to allow changes? If yes, the rule is violated. If no, then the rule is self-enforcing through circular logic. A computer program that checks itself for errors. If it finds an error in the checking process, can it trust the result? The check is suspect. So the result is suspect, which means the check is suspect. The loop never resolves. Even thought about thought is self-referential. When you think about how you're thinking, you're using the process to observe itself. and that creates distance. You're no longer just thinking. You're watching yourself think, which changes the thinking. The observation alters the thing being observed, and now you're thinking about thinking about thinking. The regress continues. Each layer of self-awareness creates another layer of observation, and none of them can be trusted because they're all contaminated by the act of observation. Self-reference appears in paradoxes everywhere. The liar paradox, Russell's paradox, the Barber Paradox, all of them involve statements or categories that reference themselves. And all of them break, because self-reference creates conditions where truth and falsehood loop back on each other. There's no stable ground, no external anchor. The system tries to define itself using itself, and that circularity produces contradiction. Organizations face this in practice. Who watches the watchers? If you create an oversight body, who oversees them? You can't use the same body. That's self-reference. So you create another layer. But now who oversees that layer? The regress continues. Eventually you hit a point where someone has to self-regulate, and self-regulation is self-reference, which means the system rests on the very thing it's supposed to avoid. Trust in a process that checks itself. The paradox of self-reference doesn't resolve. You can avoid it by prohibiting self-referential statements, banning loops, forcing systems to always point outward. But that's a restriction, a patch. Not a solution, because self-reference is natural, necessary even. Consciousness is self-referential. Systems need to monitor themselves. Language needs to be able to talk about language. You can't eliminate self-reference without crippling the system. But you can't allow it without introducing instability. So you live with the contradiction, knowing that somewhere in the foundation there's a loop, and loops, when stressed, collapse. Paradox of scarcity. Make something rare and people want it more. Not because it's better, because it's scarce. The scarcity itself creates value. Limited edition products, exclusive memberships, hard to get reservations. The difficulty of obtaining something makes it desirable, and the desire drives up demand, which creates more scarcity. The loop feeds itself, until the thing becomes valuable purely because it's hard to get, not because of what it actually is. Diamonds are the classic example. They're not that rare. The supply is controlled, restricted, released slowly to maintain the illusion of scarcity. And that illusion sustains the price. If diamonds flooded the market, their value would collapse. Not because they became less beautiful, because they became common. The scarcity was artificial, but the value it created was real. The same mechanism drives luxury goods. Designer brands limit production, not because they can't make more, because making more would reduce exclusivity. And exclusivity is what people are buying. Not the bag, not the watch, the status that comes from owning something most people can't have. Scarcity signals value, and people pay for the signal. Even in relationships, scarcity creates attraction. Someone who's always available feels less valuable. Someone hard to reach feels more desirable. The difficulty of access increases perceived worth. It's not rational. Availability should be convenient. But convenience doesn't create desire. Scarcity does. The person who's always there loses appeal. The person who's rarely available gains it. The paradox twists further when scarcity is manufactured just to create demand. Limited time offers, flash sales, artificial deadlines. None of these reflect actual scarcity. They're marketing tactics designed to trigger urgency. But they work. Because the brain treats imposed scarcity the same as natural scarcity. The fear of missing out overrides logic, and people buy things they don't need because the window is closing. Scarcity doesn't just increase value, it distorts it. Things become expensive not because they're useful, but because they're rare. And once scarcity is established, removing it destroys value. The moment something becomes widely available, it stops being special. The paradox traps value in restriction. Abundance, which should be the goal, becomes the enemy. Because what people want isn't the thing. It's the scarcity itself. Paradox of stability. You finally achieve stability, steady income, secure relationship, predictable routine, everything you worked for. And instead of relief, you feel restless. The stability that was supposed to bring peace brings boredom. You wanted security. Now you have it. And it feels like stagnation. The absence of chaos isn't freedom. It's confinement. And the very thing you chased starts to feel like a trap. Humans are built for variability, not chaos, but some level of unpredictability. Challenges. Problems to solve. When life becomes too stable, too predictable, motivation fades. There's nothing to strive for, nothing to overcome. The stability removes the friction that made action meaningful. And without friction, effort feels pointless. You're coasting, not growing. And coasting feels like decline even when nothing's actually wrong. This shows up in careers. You land the stable job, good pay, benefits, security. And within a year, you're looking for something else. Not because the job is bad, because it's too stable. The routine became monotonous. The predictability became suffocating. You wanted security. But security without challenge is just repetition. And repetition drains meaning from work. The stability you fought for turned into the cage you want to escape. Relationships face the same trap. The early chaos. Uncertainty. Will this work? That tension creates intensity. But once the relationship stabilizes, the intensity fades. Predictability sets in. You know what to expect. And knowing removes surprise. The stability is comforting. But comfort isn't excitement. And without excitement, the relationship feels flat. You wanted commitment. Got it. And now you miss the uncertainty that commitment was supposed to eliminate. Even in health, too much stability backfurls. The body needs stress. Not chronic stress, but intermittent challenge. Exercise, fasting, temperature variation. These stressors make the body stronger. Remove all stress, maintain perfect stability, and the body weakens. Muscles atrophy. Systems become fragile. The stability that was supposed to protect you makes you vulnerable. Because resilience is built through recovery from stress, not through avoiding stress entirely. Stability is necessary, but too much stability kills growth. The paradox is that what you need to feel secure, predictability, is also what makes you feel stuck. And the moment you feel stuck, you start craving instability again. Not chaos. Just enough variability to feel alive. The thing you run from when life is chaotic. And the thing you run toward when life is stable. Paradox of success. You achieve what you set out to do. The goal you worked toward for years. And the moment you reach it, it feels hollow. The satisfaction you expected doesn't arrive. You thought success would feel different, better, permanent, but it fades almost immediately. And you're left wondering why the achievement didn't deliver what it promised. The anticipation was better than the reality. The pursuit gave you direction, purpose, something to work toward. But achievement is just a moment. And moments pass. What remains is the absence of the thing that was driving you. The goal is gone. And with it, the structure it provided. Success removes the very thing that made the journey meaningful. The striving. This happens everywhere. Students work toward graduation, finally get the diploma, and feel empty. The achievement is real, but it doesn't feel like they expected, because the accomplishment is a point, and points don't sustain. What sustained them was the process, the work, the movement towards something. Success ended the movement, and now they're standing still, with no clear direction, The success they wanted removed the structure they needed. Promotions work the same way. You fight for the position. Get it. And within weeks, it's just a job. The title that seems so important doesn't change how you feel. The satisfaction is brief. And then you're looking at the next level, because the achievement didn't fill the void. It just created a new one. The thing you thought you wanted was never really the thing you wanted. You wanted the pursuit. And success ended it. Even creative work follows this pattern. Writers finish the novel they've been working on for years and feel lost. The project that consumed their life is done. And now what? The emptiness after completion isn't failure. It's the void left by the absence of purpose. The work gave them something to do, something to be. And finishing it took that away. The success feels like loss, because it is. Loss of the process that defined them. The paradox shows that success isn't a destination. It's a milestone, and milestones don't satisfy. They mark progress. But progress requires another goal, another challenge. Without that, achievement becomes the end. And endings, even successful ones, feel like death. The thing you worked for becomes the thing that leaves you empty. Not because it wasn't real, but because reaching it meant the journey was over. Paradox of knowledge. The more you learn about a subject, the more you realize how much you don't know. Your ignorance expands faster than your knowledge. At the beginning, everything seems simple, clear. You have answers, but as you go deeper, the answers reveal more questions. Complexity multiplies, and the confidence you had at the start evaporates. Expertise doesn't bring certainty. It brings awareness of how little certainty exists. Beginners feel confident because they don't know what they don't know. The field seems manageable. The boundaries clear, but that's an illusion created by ignorance. The more you study, the more those boundaries dissolve. What looked like solid ground becomes shifting terrain. And the deeper you go, the less solid anything feels. Knowledge doesn't clarify. It complicates. And complication undermines confidence. This is why experts hesitate. Beginners make bold claims. They don't see the nuance, the exceptions, the contradictions. But experts do. And seeing all that makes definitive statements harder. Every assertion comes with caveats. Every answer leads to more questions. The expert knows too much to be certain, and the beginner knows too little to doubt. The paradox appears in academia constantly. Graduate students start with big ideas, grand theories. They're going to solve the problem. But years into research, the problem fragments. What seemed like one question becomes dozens. Each answer opens new areas of uncertainty. And the dissertation, which was supposed to provide clarity, ends with more questions than it started with. The more they learned, the less they felt they knew. It shows up in fields like medicine, too. First-year students feel confident diagnosing based on symptoms. But experienced doctors hesitate. They've seen enough cases to know symptoms don't map neatly to diseases. There are always exceptions, unusual presentations, overlapping conditions. The knowledge that comes from experience makes diagnosis harder, not easier. Because experience teaches you how often the rules don't apply. The paradox of knowledge means that certainty peaks early and declines with expertise. The curve is backwards from what you'd expect, and that creates a communication problem. Experts sound uncertain, beginners sound confident, and audiences trust confidence, even when the confidence is ignorance. The person who knows the most is the one who doubts the most, and the doubt makes them sound like they know the least. Paradox of familiarity. You know someone well. You've spent years with them, seen them in every situation. You should understand them completely. But the opposite happens. The more familiar they become, the harder it is to see them clearly. Familiarity doesn't bring understanding. It brings assumptions. And assumptions replace observation. You stop paying attention because you think you already know. And that's when you stop actually knowing them. Early in a relationship, you notice everything. Every gesture, every word, you're learning, observing. But over time, observation fades. You start filling in gaps with expectations. You assume you know what they'll say before they say it, how they'll react before they react. And those assumptions create a version of them in your mind. A model. And you start interacting with the model instead of the person. The real person is still there, but you're not seeing them anymore. This is why long-term couples can feel like strangers. Not because they grew apart, because familiarity stopped them from seeing growth. They locked each other into old patterns, old versions, and when one person changes, the other doesn't notice. Because they're not looking. They're assuming, and the assumptions become invisible walls. The person you think you know best is the person you've stopped actually seeing. The same thing happens in workplaces. New employees notice inefficiencies, question processes, but long-term employees don't. Not because the problems disappeared, because they became invisible through familiarity. That's just how we do things. The statement is an admission. We stopped questioning, stopped seeing. The familiarity made the system invisible. And invisible problems don't get fixed. Even familiar places stop being seen. You drive the same route every day. After a while, you don't remember the drive. You arrive without noticing the journey. The familiarity made the environment disappear. Your brain automated it, stopped processing the details. And what you don't process, you don't see. The place hasn't changed. Your awareness of it has. Familiarity erased it. The paradox is that closeness creates distance. The better you think you know something, the less you actually see it. Knowledge becomes assumption. An assumption blocks new information. You can be with someone for years and still not know them. Not because they're hiding, because you stopped looking. Familiarity convinced you there was nothing new to see, and that conviction made you blind. Paradox of authenticity. Be yourself, that's the advice. Don't pretend, don't perform. Just be authentic. But the moment you try to be authentic, you're performing authenticity. You're thinking about how to present yourself as genuine, which means you're no longer being spontaneous. You're curating. And curation is the opposite of authenticity. The effort to be real makes you fake. True authenticity is unconscious. It happens when you're not thinking about how you come across, when you're absorbed in something else, not monitoring yourself, not adjusting. But the moment you become aware of being authentic, you're split. Part of you is acting. Part of you is watching. And the watching part breaks the authenticity. You're now aware of yourself as someone trying to be authentic, which is a performance. This trap appears everywhere. Social media encourages authenticity. Share your real life. No filters. But sharing is inherently performative. You're choosing what to show, how to frame it. Even pathetic posts are curated. The decision to post is a decision about presentation. And presentation is performance. The platform promises authenticity while structurally requiring its opposite. Relationships face this too. Just be yourself. But which self? The self you are when you're alone. That self isn't designed for social interaction. The self you present to others is always adapted, slightly edited. That's not dishonesty. That's how social functioning works. Complete transparency would be chaos. So you adjust. And the adjustment, even when well-intentioned, moves you away from raw authenticity toward a version of yourself that's socially viable. Even therapy deals with this paradox. Be honest about your feelings, but the act of verbalizing feelings changes them, puts them into language, and language simplifies, distorts. The feeling you describe isn't quite the feeling you had. It's a translation. And translation always loses something. The attempt to be authentic about your inner experience makes that experience less authentic. Because bringing it into words brings it into performance. Authenticity, as a goal, defeats itself. You can't pursue it directly. Because pursuit is effort. And effort is performance. Authenticity only happens when you forget to try. When you're too engaged in something else to think about how you're coming across. And the people most obsessed with being authentic are often the most performative. Because they're constantly monitoring themselves for signs of inauthenticity. Which means they're never actually authentic. They're performing the role of an authentic person, and the performance is all anyone sees. Paradox of confidence. Confidence comes from competence. Or so it seems. But the relationship runs backwards. The most confident people are often the least competent. And the most competent are often the least confident. Because confidence doesn't track ability. It tracks ignorance. The less you know, the more certain you feel. And the more you know, the more you doubt. Incompetent people don't know what they don't know. They can't see their mistakes. Can't recognize their gaps. So they feel confident. They think they're doing well because they lack the skill to evaluate their own performance. The confidence isn't fake. It's genuine. Based on a complete misunderstanding of their own abilities. And that misunderstanding is invisible to them. Because recognizing incompetence requires competence. Experts, on the other hand, see all the ways things can go wrong. They know the exceptions. The edge cases, the uncertainties. Their knowledge makes them cautious, hesitant. They qualify statements, add caveats. And to an outside observer, this looks like uncertainty, like they don't really know. But the opposite is true. The hesitation comes from knowing too much, from understanding complexity that confidence ignores. This creates a communication problem. In meetings, the person who speaks with the most certainty gets the most credibility. Even when they're wrong, the expert who hedges, who says, "Depends," sounds weak, unsure. So the confident, incompetent person gets trusted, makes decisions, and the knowledgeable person gets sidelined. Not because they know less, because they know more, and knowing more makes you sound less certain. The paradox also traps competent people in self-doubt. The better you get at something, the more aware you become of how much further there is to go. The gap between your ability and mastery feels wider. Not because you're getting worse, because your standards are rising. You can see flaws you couldn't see before, and seeing those flaws makes you question yourself. Meanwhile, someone far less skilled feels great. Because they can't see the flaws at all. The paradox of confidence means that certainty is often a warning sign, not a credential. The person who's sure they're right is frequently the person least equipped to know. And the person who doubts themselves might be the one who actually understands. But in a world that values confidence, doubt gets punished. And overconfidence gets rewarded, until the incompetent person's mistakes catch up. And by then, they've often moved on to be confidently wrong somewhere else. Paradox of simplicity. The simpler something looks, the harder it was to make. Elegant solutions feel effortless. But effortless is the result of enormous effort. Complexity is easy, you just add more. More features, more steps, more explanations. Making something complex look simple requires stripping away everything unnecessary. And knowing what's unnecessary requires deep understanding. Simplicity is the hardest thing to achieve. Bad design is cluttered. Buttons everywhere. Instructions for every action. The designer didn't know what mattered. So they included everything. Good design is clean, minimal, obvious. Not because it's easier to make. Because every element has been tested, refined, removed. The simplicity you see is what's left after all the complexity has been solved and hidden. The work is invisible, which makes it look like no work happened. Writing works the same way. First drafts are messy, overcomplicated, full of unnecessary words. Editing is the process of cutting, tightening, clarifying, making it simple. And that's harder than writing more, because you have to figure out what the sentence is actually trying to say. What's essential? What's decoration? Bad writers add words. Good writers remove them. And the result, a clear sentence, looks easy, like it flowed naturally. But it didn't. It was built through subtraction. Teaching follows this pattern too. Explaining something badly is easy. Use jargon. Assume knowledge. Present everything at once. The student gets lost. Explaining something well requires understanding it well enough to break it down. Find the core idea. Present it clearly. Anticipate confusion. That's hard. And when it's done well, the student thinks the concept is simple, because the teacher made it simple. The difficulty was in the preparation, not the delivery. Even relationships show this. Healthy relationships look easy, no drama, smooth communication, but that ease is the product of work. Boundaries set, conflicts resolved, patterns recognized and change. The relationship didn't start easy. It became easy through effort. And that effort is invisible from the outside. People see the result and think they're just compatible. They don't see the years of calibration that created the compatibility. The paradox of simplicity means that the easiest looking things required the most effort. And the hardest looking things often happened because no one put in the work to make them simple. Complexity is the natural state. Simplicity is achieved. And achieving it is so difficult that when it's done well, no one notices the achievement. They just experience the result and assume it was always that way. Paradox of prediction. The better you get at predicting the future, the less accurate your predictions become, because making predictions changes the future. People respond to forecasts, adjust behavior, and those adjustments invalidate the prediction. The forecast that was accurate based on current trends becomes inaccurate the moment it's shared, because sharing it alters the trends. Economic forecasts face this constantly. Predict a recession. People cut spending. Businesses delay investment. And the behavior triggered by the forecast makes the recession more likely. Or predict a boom. Investors pile in. Asset prices inflate. And the speculation turns a reasonable forecast into a bubble. The prediction didn't describe the future. It created it. And in creating it, made itself wrong. Or right for the wrong reasons. Weather forecasts avoid this problem because weather doesn't respond to predictions. A hurricane doesn't change course because you forecasted it. But human systems do. Elections, markets, social trends. All of these shift when people know what's predicted. Polls showing one candidate ahead can suppress turnout for their supporters. They think it's locked in. Or energize the opposition. They think they need to catch up. The poll changes the race. And the final result doesn't match the prediction. Not because the poll was wrong. Because it was public. Even self-fulfilling prophecies work through this mechanism. Tell someone they'll fail. They believe it. Stop trying. And fail. The prediction caused the outcome. But it looks like the prediction was accurate, when really it was causal. The forecast didn't see the future. It shaped it. And the person who made the prediction gets credit for foresight, when what they actually did was manipulation. Technology forecasting hits this paradox hard. Predictor technology will take over. Investment floods in. Development accelerates. And the technology arrives faster than it would have naturally. But that makes the forecast look prescient, when really the forecast drove the investment that made it happen. Or predictor technology will fail. Funding dries up. development stalls. And the prediction becomes true, not because the technology was flawed, because belief in its failure killed it before it could develop. The paradox of prediction creates an impossible situation. The more influence your forecast has, the less reliable it becomes, because the forecast changes behavior, and changed behavior produces different outcomes. You can predict accurately if no one listens, or you can be influential and watch your predictions fail. Not because you're wrong, because being heard makes you wrong. Paradox of recognition. You want to be recognized for your work, valued, appreciated. But the moment you start working for recognition, the quality of your work declines. Because now you're optimizing for visibility, not value. You're choosing projects that get noticed, not projects that matter. The desire for recognition shifts your focus from the work itself to the perception of the work. And that shift degrades the work. Artists face this trap. Make art for yourself. It's authentic, personal, maybe brilliant, but unknown. Make art for an audience. It gets seen. But the need to please dilutes the vision. You second guess. Play it safe. Aim for what's popular. And the art that gets recognized isn't the art you wanted to make. It's the art the audience wanted to see. You got the recognition, but lost the thing that made your work worth recognizing in the first place. The same thing happens in careers. Work quietly. Build competence. Solve real problems. And you might get overlooked, but focus on getting noticed. Politics. Visibility. Self-promotion. And you're spending time on perception instead of output. The recognition might come, but it's for a performance, not for substance. You're recognized for looking good, not for being good. And once you're in that game, it's hard to leave, because maintaining the appearance takes all the energy that used to go into the work. Even in relationships, seeking validation backfires. Crave approval, fish for compliments. Need constant reassurance, and you become exhausting. People pull away. The validation you wanted becomes harder to get, because the need for it made you less appealing. The people who get the most genuine appreciation are often the ones who aren't seeking it. They're focused on something else. The relationship, the conversation, the moment, and the lack of needness makes them more attractive, which brings the validation they weren't chasing. The paradox extends to expertise. Want to be seen as an expert? You start acting like one, positioning, branding, public speaking. But those activities take time away from deepening expertise. The more you focus on being recognized as an expert, the less time you spend becoming one. And eventually the gap shows. You're famous for expertise you no longer have, because maintaining the recognition replaced building the skill. Recognition is a byproduct. It comes from doing work that matters. Work that's good enough to be noticed without being designed for notice. But the moment you reverse that, the moment recognition becomes the goal, the work suffers. Because you're no longer making choices based on what's best. You're making choices based on what's visible. And visible isn't always valuable. Sometimes the most important work is invisible, and chasing recognition means you'll never do it. Paradox of connection. Technology promised connection, more ways to reach people, instant communication, global networks, and it delivered. You can talk to anyone, anytime, anywhere. But the more connected you are, the more isolated you feel. The tools designed to bring people together have made loneliness worse, not better. More connection created less connection, because the type of connection changed. Social media lets you stay in touch with hundreds of people, but the interactions are shallow. Likes, comments, brief exchanges. You're connected to many, but close to none. The depth that makes connection meaningful gets lost in the volume. You're maintaining relationships, but not deepening them. And shallow connection, spread across many people, doesn't satisfy the need for intimacy. It creates the appearance of connection while delivering isolation. Messaging apps make communication constant. You can reach someone anytime, but that availability becomes an obligation. You're always reachable, always expected to respond. The communication never stops. And constant communication isn't deep communication. It's maintenance, small talk, updates, the kind of exchange that fills time but doesn't create closeness. You're talking more, connecting less. Even video calls, which should bring people closer, often don't. The format is awkward. Everyone's performing, aware of being watched. The spontaneity of in-person interaction disappears. Conversations feel scripted. And after the call ends, you're alone again. The connection was brief, mediated, not sustained. The technology bridged distance, but it didn't create presence. And presence is what connection requires. The paradox deepens with the illusion of connection. You see people's lives online, their updates, photos, achievements, and it feels like you know them, like you're part of their life. But you're not. You're observing, not participating. The illusion of closeness prevents actual closeness. Because why reach out when you already feel connected? Why make plans when you saw their update? The passive consumption of someone's life replaces active engagement. And passive connection isn't connection. It's spectatorship. The tools gave us connection. But they also gave us substitutes for connection. And substitutes are easier, less demanding. You can feel connected without the work of being connected, without the risk, the vulnerability, the time. And the ease of the substitute makes real connection harder, because real connection requires effort, presence, attention. And when you can get a cheaper version instantly, the real thing starts to feel like too much work. The paradox trapped us. More ways to connect, less actual connection. And the gap keeps widening. Paradox of identity. Who are you? The question seems simple, but the answer fractures under examination. You're not one thing. You're different in different contexts, different with different people. The you at work isn't the you at home. The you alone isn't the you in a group. Which one is real? All of them. Identity isn't stable. It shifts, adapts, and the more you try to pin it down, the more it slips away. You present a version of yourself to others, curated, adjusted, not fake, but not complete either. You emphasize certain traits, downplay others. The version you show is shaped by who you're with and what you're doing. And that version feels real in the moment. But it's not the whole you, just a facet, a role. And roles change when the context changes. So which role is your identity? The one you perform most often? The one you perform most comfortably? There's no clear answer, because identity is situational. Even alone, you're not consistent. Your thoughts shift. Your mood changes. What you wanted yesterday isn't what you want today. The priorities that felt urgent last year feel irrelevant now. You've changed, but gradually, imperceptibly. So you still think of yourself as the same person. Continuous. But are you? How much can you change and still be you? At what point does change become transformation? And if you've transformed, is the old you still part of your identity? Or has it been replaced? Memory complicates it further. Your identity is partly built from your past, but memory is unreliable, selective. You remember events differently than they happened. Rewrite them over time. The story you tell about yourself shapes who you think you are. But the story isn't accurate. It's constructed. Which means your identity is partly fiction, a narrative you've built, and the narrative can change without the past changing. You reinterpret, reframe, and suddenly you're someone different. Not because you changed. Because your story about yourself changed. Other people add another layer. They have their own version of you, based on their interactions, their perceptions. And their version is part of your identity too, because identity is partly social, defined by how others see you, treat you, respond to you. But their version doesn't match yours. They see parts you don't, miss parts you think are central. So which version is real? Yours. Theirs. Some combination. There's no synthesis. Just competing definitions that never align. The paradox of identity is that the self you're trying to define doesn't have fixed boundaries. It's fluid. Context-dependent. Constructed through narrative and interaction. You're not a thing. You're a process. Constantly becoming. Never settled. And the moment you think you've figured out who you are, something shifts. The context changes. The story updates. And the identity you thought you had become something you used to be. The self is always in motion. And motion can't be pinned down.